The Queen's new bodyguard was eating something at his post. That was the first thing Security Commander Vethron noticed when she arrived for the morning shift change. Not the human's posture, not his weapon's configuration, not the 17 protocol violations his presence represented in the royal antechamber. The food. A small container of it, eaten with one hand while the other remained at his side, and he was doing it standing up, in full view of the corridor, with the specific, unhurried quality of a being who was not concerned about being watched. He was also bleeding from a cut above his left eye. He had not reported it. He had not treated it. He was just standing there, bleeding slightly, eating whatever was in the container, watching the corridor with the flat, attentive gaze of a predator that had found a comfortable position and had no intention of leaving it. Vethron stopped 3 meters away and stared at him. He looked back. "Morning," he said. She had no idea what to do with him. And that, she would later understand, was precisely the point. His name was David Osei. 31 years old. Former something. His service record had been partially classified by whoever at the compact had recommended him, and the unclassified portions were written in the specific spare language of documents that were hiding more than they were revealing. Height, 1 meter 82. Weight, 89 kilograms, which was average for a human male and which meant essentially nothing to Vethron except that he was smaller than every other candidate the Queen had reviewed. Commendations, 6, 4 of which had redacted citations. Medical history, extensive, in the way of someone who had been injured repeatedly and repaired repeatedly and had apparently found neither experience sufficient reason to change careers. He had been hired 6 days ago, over Vethron's explicit written objection. The objection had been detailed, professional, and completely ignored. Queen Mirasath of the Velhari Collective had read the objection, set it aside, and sent a one-line response. Asterisk, the human stays. Assign him the primary antechamber post, asterisk. Vethron had spent the 6 days since trying to understand why, and she was not closer to an answer. The Velhari did not typically employ human security personnel. Humans were new to the galactic community, barely a century of interstellar presence, and while their physical capabilities were the subject of increasing academic interest, they had not established the kind of institutional security track record that royal protection typically required. The firms that provided protection for Velhari nobility were old, established, and operated by species with centuries of relevant experience. Queen Mirasath had bypassed all of them. She had hired one human from a firm that had existed for 11 years, through a referral chain that Vethron had traced back 3 steps before it disappeared into a classification barrier she didn't have the clearance to cross. The classification barrier was the first mystery. The cut above his eye was the second. Because Vethron had reviewed the overnight security logs before coming on shift, and those logs showed nothing. No incidents. No intrusions. No alerts. The antechamber had been quiet from shift change to shift change, according to every sensor in the system. And yet the human was bleeding. "What happened to your face?" she asked. He touched the cut with 2 fingers, briefly, the way you touch something you've already assessed and made a decision about. "Practice," he said. "In the antechamber." "Before my shift," he said. "The room 3 levels down. The one that's unscheduled on Tuesday mornings." She made a note to check the logs for that room. "Practice for what?" He looked at her with the flat, patient gaze she was already coming to recognize as his default expression. "For the job," he said. He went back to his food. She went to find the Queen, and to ask, again, more directly than in her written objection, what exactly was happening. The Queen's answer would be the third mystery, and it would be the one that took Vethron the longest to understand. Queen Mirasath received her in the morning audience chamber, which was a room designed to communicate power through architecture, high ceilings, pale stone, the specific arrangement of space that made visitors feel small without being told to. The Queen was at her correspondence when Vethron entered, and she did not look up immediately, which was itself a communication. She was 47 years old by Velhari reckoning, which placed her in the early maturity of a species that measured political careers in decades and expected its rulers to accumulate wisdom in proportion to reign length. She had been queen for 9 years. She was, by any assessment Vethron could apply, a good one, careful, deliberate, genuinely intelligent in the specific way that distinguished leaders who understood power from those who merely wielded it. Vethron had protected her for 6 of those 9 years and trusted her judgment in almost everything. Almost. He was bleeding this morning, Vethron said. Unreported injury. And the overnight logs show nothing, which means either the logs are wrong or he was injured outside the monitored period, which means he was practicing in an unscheduled space before his shift began. The Queen set down her correspondence. Yes. You knew. I know what he does every morning, the Queen said. He told me in the briefing before I hired him that he would need 2 hours before each shift for preparation. I approved it. What kind of preparation produces a facial laceration? The Queen looked at her with the specific expression of someone deciding how much explanation is going to be necessary. Sit down, Vethron. She sat. You want to know why I hired him, the Queen said. I want to know what he is, Vethron said. His service record is classified above my clearance level. His commendations have redacted citations. He was referred through a chain I can't fully trace. And he practices something for 2 hours before every shift, alone, in an unmonitored room, and comes out bleeding. She looked at the Queen steadily. I am your security commander. If I don't understand what's protecting you, I can't protect you. The Queen was quiet for a moment. 3 months ago, she said, the Compact's Threat Assessment Division briefed me on an active assassination program. Professional. Multitude. Contracted by parties who remain unidentified. She paused. The assessment division told me that my existing security arrangement, excellent as it is, and it is excellent, was designed for the kind of threat that professional security is typically designed for. Visible threats. Accessible threats. Threats that operate within the expected parameters of political violence. And this program doesn't, Vethron said. The teams involved are specialists, the Queen said. 3 of the last 4 targets they accepted did not survive. The 4th survived because they left the system entirely and did not return. She met Vethron's eyes. I cannot leave the system. The political situation requires my presence. Then you need better security, Vethron said. Not different security. Better. The Compact has resources. The Compact's resources, the Queen said quietly, operate on predictable logic. Threat appears, threat is assessed, response is generated. The firms involved in this program are specifically skilled at defeating predictable logic. She paused. The Compact's Threat Assessment Division, after the 4th target, commissioned an independent analysis. They asked, what kind of security defeats an unpredictable threat? Vethron waited. The analysis identified one operational category, the Queen said, that consistently produced outcomes against this type of threat in the Compact's historical record. Not the most powerful security. Not the most numerous. One specific type. She looked out the window at the city below. The type that the threat doesn't know how to model. A human, Vethron said slowly. A specific human, the Queen said. From a specific background. Doing a specific kind of practice, 2 hours before every shift, that produces the specific kind of readiness that you cannot replicate in a standard security curriculum. What kind of practice? The Queen turned back to her. That, she said, is what his classification is protecting. Not from you, specifically. From everyone who might be watching what questions get asked about him. She picked up her correspondence again. He is here, she said, because the people who want me dead are very good at what they do. And what I needed was not someone better at the same thing. She looked at Vethron one final time. I needed someone they've never encountered before. The first attempt came 8 days after Davin Osei began his posting. Vethron reviewed the incident footage 17 times before she submitted her report, and each review produced a different question that the previous questions had not prepared her for. The attempt was professional. Compact standard infiltration protocol, modified in the specific ways that indicated long experience with Velhari security architecture. 2 individuals. Entry through the secondary maintenance corridor that appeared on no public schematic and appeared on the internal schematic only in a classified tier that should have been inaccessible to outside actors. They had the schematic. They reached the antechamber level at 0340 hours. The overnight sensor logs showed nothing, the same blank record that had characterized Davin's first night, which had initially troubled Vethron and which she now understood, watching the footage, was not a sensor failure. The sensors were working. There was simply nothing happening in the antechamber to record. Because Davin Osei was not in the antechamber at 0340. The footage showed this clearly, the antechamber, empty. The two infiltrators reaching the final approach corridor. And then, 17 seconds before they reached the antechamber entrance, the footage showed something that Vethron had to slow to 1/4 speed to fully register. Davin was already behind them. Not moving to intercept from the antechamber. Already in the corridor, already positioned, already, and this was the part that required repeated viewing, already completely still, in the shadow of a structural alcove that the infiltrators had passed without looking at, because it was behind them and they were focused forward and the sensor sweep they had clearly conducted before entry had shown nothing in that alcove. The sensor sweep had been conducted 30 seconds before Davin entered the alcove. The timing was exact. He knew where they were going to sweep, Meth Kareth, who had no involvement in the royal security operation but who Vethron had pulled in to review the footage because she needed someone else to confirm she was seeing what she was seeing, said quietly. He knew when they were going to sweep, Vethron corrected, and where the sweep's blind spots were, and how long he had after the sweep to move into position. How? That's what I've been asking, she said. Watch the next 40 seconds. The next 40 seconds showed the two infiltrators reaching the antechamber entrance, pausing to conduct a final approach assessment, beginning to move through the entrance, then stopping. They stopped because Davin Osei was standing in the antechamber, in the center of the room, facing them, not in a threat posture, not with weapons drawn, standing the way he stood every morning when Vethron arrived, the flat, patient, unhurried stance of something that has found a position it likes. The infiltrators looked at him. He looked back. What did they say? Meth Kareth asked. The footage had audio. Play it, Vethron said. The audio was clear. The taller infiltrator said, in compact standard, stand aside. Davin said nothing for 2 seconds. Then he said in the same language, very quietly, no. One word. The infiltrators exchanged a look, the specific rapid communication of professionals assessing a situation together. Then the taller one looked back at Davin and did something that Vethron had not expected and that Meth Kareth, watching, visibly did not expect either. He took a step back. Just one step. Involuntary looking. The step you take when something in your assessment of a situation has shifted faster than your conscious mind has processed. Why did he step back? Meth Kareth said. I don't know, Vethron said. Keep watching. What happened next was 12 seconds long. The footage showed it clearly, and the footage made no sense, and Vethron had watched it 16 times before this viewing and still could not explain the specific sequencing of it. What the footage showed, at full speed, was professional violence, efficiently executed, with an outcome that was not in dispute. What Vethron had spent 16 viewings trying to understand was the way of it. The specific movement logic. The decisions embedded in the 12 seconds that were not the decisions she would have expected from the service record's sparse outline, not the decisions she would have expected from a bodyguard, not the decisions she would have expected from anyone who was operating within a recognizable professional framework. Because professional security operated on a specific logic. Contain the threat, neutralize the threat, secure the principle. Davin Osei's 12 seconds did not follow that logic. His 12 seconds followed a different logic. One that Meth Kareth, watching, leaned forward to see more clearly, and then leaned back, and then said nothing for a long time. What was he doing? Vethron asked. I need to think about it, Meth Kareth said. Meth Kareth. I need to think about it, he said again quietly. Because if I'm reading this correctly, if what I'm seeing is what I think I'm seeing, then the classification on his service record is not protecting a technique. She looked at him. Then what is it protecting? He looked at the frozen footage. At the human standing in the center of the antechamber at 0340 hours, with two professional infiltrators unconscious on the floor and no apparent increase in his heart rate visible in the biometric sensors that were standard in all palace security spaces. A category, Meth Kareth said. A category of training that I've read about in historical records but have never seen in active operation. He paused. A category the Compact stopped formally teaching 40 years ago because the psychological profile required to complete it was considered too specific for general military application. What does that mean? He looked at her. It means, he said, that somewhere in his history, this man was selected for something. Not trained in it, selected for it. Because you cannot build the psychological architecture for what I'm watching in 12 seconds of footage. You can only find it. He was quiet. And the people who contracted this assassination program, however good they are, have never had to account for it. Because the last person confirmed to operate from this category died 19 years ago. The silence in the review room was very long. They don't know what he is, Vethron said. No, Meth Kareth said. They sent a professional team against a professional bodyguard. They encountered something else entirely. He stood up, moved toward the door and stopped. Find out everything you can about what he practices in those 2 hours, he said. Not to classify it. Not to report it. He looked back. Because I think you need to understand what is standing between your queen and a very serious problem. And I think when you understand it, you are going to have a completely different question about this situation than the one you're currently asking. He left. Vethron sat with the frozen footage and tried to figure out what question she should be asking. She asked Davin directly. It was the morning after the incident review, and he was at his post, and he was not eating this time. He was simply standing, watching the corridor, with the cut above his eye almost healed in the rapid way that she was learning to recognize as characteristic. The two individuals from the incident, she said. How did you know when the sensor sweep was? He looked at her. There's a specific vibration pattern in the floor when the sweep system activates, he said. The maintenance manual mentions it in a footnote. I read the maintenance manual when I arrived. You read the maintenance manual. Every building has one, he said. They're underused. She absorbed this. How did you get into position before the sweep finished? I counted the sweep duration in the first week, he said. Average was 41 seconds. I practiced the movement into the alcove 17 times until I could do it in under 30. In the 2-hour morning sessions. Among other things. She looked at him. What are the other things? He was quiet for a moment in the way she was learning preceded answers that were going to require her to adjust her framework. Every threat has a pattern, he said. Even the threats that think they don't have patterns. The pattern is usually in the assumptions, what they assume will be where they expect it, when they expect it, how they expect it. My job is to not be where they expect, when they expect, how they expect. He paused. The 2 hours is for building the map of expectations so I know what to violate. You practice violating expectations, she said. Every morning, he said. And the bleeding. Some of the practices have contact components, he said. She stared at him. You practice with someone who hits you. We take turns, he said simply. It's more useful if you're the one being surprised sometimes too. She did not ask who the partner was. She was not certain she wanted to know. The incident last night, she said carefully. Meth Kareth reviewed the footage. He said the category of training you were using. He said the Compact stopped formally teaching it 40 years ago. Something shifted in his expression. Very slightly. The first thing she had seen move in his face that wasn't a direct response to a question. Meth Kareth is well read, he said. He said you can't train someone into it. You can only find them. She held his gaze. What does that mean? He was quiet for longer than usual. It means, he said finally, that the selection criterion isn't skill. It's a specific psychological relationship with uncertainty. Most people, most species, experience uncertainty as something to be resolved. A problem. You move from not knowing to knowing, and the knowing is the goal. He paused. The category Methkareth is describing selects for people who experience uncertainty differently, who are comfortable there, who don't need to resolve it to function. Comfortable with not knowing, she said. Comfortable with moving before the picture is complete, he said. Because in the environments this category was designed for, the picture is never complete. If you wait for it to be complete, you're already behind. He looked at the corridor. The two infiltrators last night, they were excellent. Professional. They had good information and a solid approach. What they didn't have was a response framework for a situation that was already different from their model before they arrived. Because you had already changed it, she said. Before their sweep, he said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, watching his face, which had returned to its resting state of patient, flat attention. The people who hired them, she said. When they find out the attempt failed, what do they send next? He looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something in his expression that was not patience and not calm and not the flat predator alertness of his default state. It was, she realized slowly, the thing that the morning practices were for. The thing that the 2-hour sessions built and the cut above his eye represented and the maintenance manuals and the counted sweep durations all fed into. It was readiness, not confidence, not certainty, not the professional assurance of someone who knew they would win. Readiness, the specific psychological state of someone who did not know what was coming and was prepared for that. I don't know, he said. That's what the morning is for. The second attempt came from a direction that no one predicted. Not infiltration, not approach, not the professional, physical, directly violent methodology of the first team. The second attempt was a compound neurotoxin introduced into the palace atmospheric circulation system through a maintenance access point that required 6 separate authorization levels to reach and that had, according to the access logs, last been used 11 months ago by a certified maintenance team whose credentials were legitimate, whose work had been inspected and approved, and who had, on that visit, installed something small and dormant and patient in a duct junction that served Queen's private suite. It was discovered at 0611 hours when the system's chemical sensors registered an anomaly that the system's anomaly protocol classified as a priority 3 atmospheric irregularity, which triggered a review queue notification that would have reached the appropriate maintenance supervisor within 2 to 4 hours during standard operating periods. Davin Osei received the notification at 0611 and was in the maintenance access corridor by 0614. Vethron arrived at 0619, responding to his alert, and found him at the duct junction with the device in his hands and a face that told her nothing about what he was feeling. How did you get the notification? She said. The priority 3 review queue was maintenance department routing. It should not have reached the personal alert system of a security personnel contractor. I added myself to the queue, he said. In week 1. She stared at him. The maintenance manual? She said. The routing appendix, he said. It takes about an hour to add an outside address if you have the right authorization codes. You don't have authorization codes for the maintenance routing system. He looked at her. Someone gave them to me, he said. Who? He turned the device over in his hands, examining it with the focused attention of someone cataloging information. The Queen, he said. Vethron stood very still. The Queen gave you maintenance routing authorization codes. In the first briefing, he said. She gave me access to everything that touched the physical environment of the palace. Infrastructure, logistics, supply chain documentation, vendor access records. He looked up. She said, you can't see threats you don't have data on. She gave me data. She gave a contract security operative full infrastructure access to a royal palace. Yes, he said. The implication of this landed slowly, because it was large and it required her to rearrange her understanding of several things simultaneously. The Queen had not simply hired a human bodyguard. The Queen had given that bodyguard the building. Not the security architecture. Vethron controlled that. The physical building. Every system, every access point, every data feed, every routing queue that touched anything structural or logistical in the palace compound. Which meant that for 8 weeks, while Vethron had been managing the security layer, Dave and Osei had been building a second layer entirely beneath it. Not competing with hers. Not duplicating it. Occupying the spaces hers didn't reach. The maintenance routings. The structural documentation. The vendor access patterns. The chemical sensor anomaly cues. He had been mapping the palace from the inside out, through every data source that security assessment didn't routinely monitor, specifically because security assessment didn't routinely monitor them. She planned this before she hired you, Vethron said. We planned it together, he said. In the briefing. I told her what access I would need to do the job the way I do the job. She agreed to provide it. Without telling me. He looked at her directly. If you had known, you would have written a second objection. Yes, she said. I would have. And she would have overruled it again, he said. But it would have been on record. And the people who look at records would have known that the Queen's contract bodyguard had infrastructure access, and the specific nature of that access would have been visible to anyone with the right clearance to review objection logs. He paused. The value of the access depends on the people planning the next attempt not knowing it exists. She looked at the device in his hands, dormant now, removed from the junction it had been resting in for 11 months. They planned this before you arrived, she said. 11 months ago. At least, he said. Which means the assassination program has been running for at least a year. Probably longer, he said. The device is sophisticated. The installation required preparation. You don't install something like this speculatively. You install it when you have a specific timeline. What timeline? He looked at her. That's what I've been trying to work out, he said. Since week 2. When I found the first anomaly in the vendor access records. She stopped breathing for a moment. The first anomaly, she said. There are multiple. 3, he said. This was the second. The first I was able to assess and dismiss. The third I haven't located yet. He set the device down on the edge of the duct housing. That's the morning work right now. Finding the third. The corridor was very quiet. You've known about a third potential device for how long? She said. For days, he said. And you didn't report it. He looked at her. I'm telling you now. You're telling me when you're standing in front of the second device. Yes, he said. Because now you have context that you didn't have 4 days ago. 4 days ago, telling you would have produced a search protocol that would have been visible. Whatever the third anomaly is, I don't know its nature yet, which is the problem. A visible search might trigger it if it's responsive to detection. He paused. I needed to understand what I was looking for before I started looking in a way that could be seen. She stood in the maintenance corridor and looked at him. And she understood, in that moment, with the specific clarity of someone who has been operating in a framework and has just seen the framework from outside, what Methkareth had meant about the category. About the psychological relationship with uncertainty. About the difference between resolving not knowing and being comfortable inside it. Dave and Osei had known for 4 days that there was a third threat he couldn't locate. He had not reported it because reporting it would have changed the environment in ways he couldn't fully predict. He had continued his morning sessions. He had monitored his cues. He had found the second device when it activated. He had not, at any point in those 4 days, been paralyzed by the not knowing. He had simply continued. What do you need? She said. Something in his face shifted. Very slightly. The same thing she had seen when she asked what the next attempt would look like. Not relief. Something smaller and more specific than relief. The thing that happens when you've been doing something alone for a long time and someone offers to stand beside you. Eyes on the supply chain documentation for the last 14 months, he said. Specifically the vendors with irregular access intervals. I've been cross-referencing against the maintenance logs, but there are 4 vendors I can't fully account for and I don't have enough access in the procurement records to close the gap. I have procurement access, she said. I know, he said. She looked at him for a moment. You've known I have procurement access since week 1, she said. Yes. You didn't ask. You had 17 objections to my presence, he said. I thought it was reasonable to wait until you had fewer. She almost laughed. She didn't. How many do I have now? She said. He looked at her. 2, he said. What are they? You still don't fully trust what I do, he said. And you still don't understand why the Queen hired me instead of adding to your team. She thought about this. I understand the first one, she said. The second, I'm starting to. Tell me when you finish, he said, picking up the device again and wrapping it carefully. It's a more interesting question than it sounds. They found the third anomaly together. It took 11 days. 11 days of cross-referencing procurement records against vendor access logs, against maintenance intervals, against chemical sensor data, against the 3 other data streams that Davin had identified in his first weeks as the overlooked infrastructure of a building's actual operational life. The streams that security assessment didn't monitor because they weren't security architecture. The streams that the people planning the assassination program had moved through because they were invisible to the people looking in the right places for the wrong things. During those 11 days, 3 more things happened. The contracting organization sent 2 separate reconnaissance assets to assess why the first team had not reported back. Both assets made it as far as the palace's outer perimeter and no further, because Davin had mapped the perimeter's behavioral patterns in his first week using the vendor access logs. Specifically the delivery schedules that revealed which entry points experienced routine traffic at what intervals, and had identified 2 positions that offered observation angles on the outer perimeter without being covered by the formal security sweep. He had placed something in both positions. He did not tell Vethron what he placed there. He told her only that the positions would be monitored and that any reconnaissance conducted from them would be, in his word, complicated. The reconnaissance assets did not penetrate the perimeter. She did not ask again what was in those positions. The second thing was a communication, indirect, through 3 relay points, from the contracting organization to an intermediary they had apparently used before and apparently trusted, that Davin found in a procurement data stream that should have contained only supply invoices. How he found it he did not fully explain. He gave her the communication, which was brief and which used language that required context she didn't have to fully interpret. She brought it to the Queen. The Queen read it again, and sat with it for a long time. They're escalating the timeline, the Queen said. That's my interpretation too, Davin said. He had come with Vethron because Vethron had decided, 11 days in, that his presence in briefings was more useful than his absence. What does escalating mean in their operational terms? The Queen asked. It means the indirect approach has a deadline, he said. If the installed preparation doesn't produce results before the deadline, they move to something else. Something else being? He looked at her steadily. Direct, he said. The Queen was quiet. How long? Vethron asked. The communication was time-stamped 6 days ago, he said. Based on the language, I think the deadline is within 2 weeks. You think, Vethron said. I don't know the exact timeline, he said. I know the shape of it. They're frustrated. The first team didn't report. The reconnaissance didn't return useful information. The installed preparation didn't activate on schedule. They're losing confidence in the indirect approach and moving towards something they understand better. Direct violence, Vethron said. Which they're very good at, he said. Better than indirect. The first team was professional. A direct approach will be more so. The Queen looked at him. You said, frustration, she said. You're characterizing their internal state. Yes. From a 6-day-old procurement stream communication. From everything I've been watching for 11 weeks, he said. The communication confirms it. But it was already visible in the pattern changes. They've been adapting their approach 3 times since I arrived. Each adaptation is faster than the last. That's what frustration looks like in an operation, decreasing patience between failures. The Queen looked at Vethron. Vethron looked at Davin. You've been tracking their frustration, she said. I've been tracking everything that's visible, he said. Frustration is visible. It changes decisions. And what does a frustrated, skilled direct approach team do differently from a patient one? He was quiet for a moment. They stop trying to be invisible, he said. They rely on speed instead of concealment. They assume that if they move fast enough, the response time won't matter. Does that make them more dangerous? The Queen asked. He thought about it with the honest seriousness that she had come to recognize. To most security arrangements, he said, yes. Speed defeats response time. If you're waiting to see the threat before you respond, and the threat is fast enough, you lose the window. He paused. The advantage of the approach I use is that I'm not waiting to see the threat. You're already in position, Vethron said. Before the sweep, he said. The Queen looked at him for a long moment. They're going to send something significant, she said. Something that will rely on being faster than my security can respond. Yes, he said. And you're telling me this now because I need something, he said. For the first time since I arrived, I need something I don't have. She waited. I need them to believe they know where I'll be, he said. I need a pattern. Something visible in the security logs that indicates my positioning has become predictable. He paused. Which means I need you to change the real logs, the ones I know they have access to through the vendor chain we identified, to show a different pattern than what I'm actually doing. The Queen looked at Vethron. Can you do that? The Queen asked. Vethron thought about it for a moment. Yes, she said. But it means falsifying official security documentation. Yes, he said. Which is a serious. Yes, he said. I know what it is. He met her eyes. I'm asking you to do something that has a cost. I'm not pretending it doesn't. She looked at him for a long time. 11 weeks. The cut above the eye that never fully healed before there was a new one. The maintenance manuals. The 4 days of knowing about a third threat without reporting it because reporting it would have changed the environment. The procurement cross-references. The 2 positions on the outer perimeter that she still hadn't asked about. 11 weeks of a human doing the job in the space beneath the job, in the layer that wasn't visible in the standard framework, alone and without explanation, producing results that she couldn't fully account for using any professional model she had. If I do this, she said, and the direct approach comes and it goes wrong. It might, he said. I want you to know that. I don't know the exact timing or the specific approach or the team composition. I'm working from a shape, not a picture. And you're comfortable with that, she said. I'm as comfortable with it as I'm going to be, he said. Which is different. She looked at him, and she thought about what Meth Kareth had said. About the category. About the psychological relationship with uncertainty. About the difference between resolving not knowing and being functional inside it. Not comfortable with not knowing. Functional inside it. Moving before the picture was complete, because the picture was never going to be complete, and waiting for it meant losing. All right, she said. The direct approach came 9 days later. It was fast. It was professional. It was 4 individuals who moved through the palace's outer perimeter with a speed and a method that bypassed 3 layers of Vethron's security architecture and should have reached the Queen's private corridor in under 4 minutes. They reached the corridor in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, which was faster than the model had predicted. They found it empty. Not empty as in abandoned, empty as in the specific, unsettling quality of a space that has been recently and deliberately vacated. The kind of empty that tells a professional team that something has changed, that the information they were operating on is no longer accurate, that the situation they prepared for is not the situation they have arrived in. They had 30 seconds of that empty corridor before they understood what it meant. Daven Osei had not been where the logs said he would be. He had not been in the corridors they had planned to move through. He had not been anywhere in the pattern the falsified logs had indicated. He had been in the corridor where they arrived. In a position that the approach route required them to pass, moving in the direction that the approach route required them to move, with his back to a wall and the specific quality of stillness that the 2 agents from the first attempt had encountered and had not processed fast enough. The 4-person team was more experienced than the first. They still had the same problem. They knew where he should have been. They had planned for where he should have been. They arrived to find him somewhere that their model had not accounted for, moving from a position that their sweep had registered as empty, doing something that their response framework had not been built to address. What followed was not clean. That was what Vethron's review of the footage produced, later, in the specific and important sense that the outcome was not in doubt but the cost of the outcome was real. The 4-person team was highly skilled. Davin was one person. There was a period of approximately 90 seconds. She watched it at full speed and then at half speed and then at full speed again, where the outcome was not certain. Where the four-person team's speed and professionalism and coordination were pressing against something that didn't respond to pressure the way pressure expected, and the result of that collision was genuinely unpredictable. He won. 90 seconds, and he won, and afterward he sat down against the corridor wall, and that was the moment Vethron arrived, and she saw his face for the first time looking like what it was. The face of a human being who had just done something very difficult at significant personal cost and was not pretending otherwise. "How bad?" she said. "2 ribs," he said. "Maybe 3. And my left hand." He looked at the hand, which was not positioned correctly. "I'll need the medical team." She called them. She crouched in front of him while they were coming, and she looked at him, and she thought about 11 weeks and 2 hours every morning and the cuts above the eye and the maintenance manuals and the 4 days of knowing and the falsified logs and the 90 seconds that could have gone a different way. "Meth Caratha's second question," she said. "The one he told me I should be asking." He looked at her. "He said when I understood what you are, I would have a different question than the one I was asking," she said. "I've been asking who hired you and what your training is and how you knew what you knew." She paused. "He meant I should be asking something else." "What did you decide?" he said. His voice was level despite the ribs. "Why you?" she said. "Of all the people with this category of training, why specifically you? Why did the referral chain lead to you?" He looked at her. "That's a better question," he said. "What's the answer?" The medical team arrived before he spoke. They moved around Vethron with professional efficiency, and Davin let them work with the patient quality that she had stopped finding strange weeks ago, and he looked at the ceiling of the corridor while they assessed the damage, and he said, without looking at her, "Because I applied for this job 3 years before the Queen hired me." She stared at him. "The referral chain," he said. "You traced it 3 steps before the classification barrier. The barrier is where the Compact's Threat Assessment Division sits. Before the division is where my firm sits. Before my firm is where I sat, 3 years ago, watching the political situation around the Velhari Queen and writing a formal assessment that concluded the risk profile was going to require something the standard security market didn't provide." "You identified the threat before the threat identified her," Vethron said. "I identified the type of threat," he said. "The specific actors came later. You've been preparing for this for 3 years. The morning session started 4 years ago," he said. "But the preparation for this specific situation?" He paused. 3 years. "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. "The Queen knew this," she said. "When the Compact's assessment division contacted my firm, my file was already in their system with a note attached to the Queen's name," he said. "I put it there 3 years ago. When they went looking for the category Meth Carath identified, they found me already waiting. He had not simply been hired. He had positioned himself to be hired. 3 years before the Queen needed him. With the same logic that put him in an alcove before a sensor sweep. Moving before the picture was complete. The medical team was splinting his hand. He watched them work. The people who contracted the assassination program," he said. "They're still out there. The 4 individuals tonight were the direct approach. The direct approach failing means they go back to something else." He looked at her. "The work isn't done." "I know," she said. "I'll need 2 weeks for the hand," he said. "The ribs are manageable now. The hand needs time." 2 weeks, she said. "The morning sessions will be different," he said. "I can still do most of them. I'll need to adjust." She looked at him. At the hand. At the ribs that were making his breathing slightly shorter than usual. At the face that had, for a moment in the corridor, looked like what it was, and that was now returning to the flat patient attentiveness of its resting state. "What are the 2 objections?" she said. He looked at her. "You said I had 2 objections left," she said. 11 days ago. What are they now?" He thought about it. "One," he said. "Which one?" He was quiet for a moment. "You still don't fully understand why the Queen hired me instead of adding to your team," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I think I do," she said. "I think she hired you because your team and my team occupy different spaces. You're in the space beneath the standard framework, where the threats that defeat standard frameworks operate. She paused. I'm the framework. You're what happens in the gaps. He looked at her. Yes, he said. And she needed both, she said. Not one or the other. Both. Yes, he said. But she needed me not to know about you, she said, until I had enough context to understand what I was looking at. Because before that context, I would have kept trying to fit you into my framework. And you don't fit. He held her gaze. That's not an objection anymore, he said quietly. No, she said. It's not. The Queen's security arrangement did not change structurally after that night. On paper, it looked identical to what it had been. A security commander with a professional team, standard protocols, standard architecture. A contract bodyguard in the primary antechamber. What changed was invisible to anyone looking at the paper. Vethron had procurement access. Daven had infrastructure access. Together, they had something that neither of them had alone. A view of the palace that covered both layers simultaneously. The visible architecture and the invisible one. The standard framework and the gaps where the threats that defeated standard frameworks tried to move. The contracting organization made 2 more attempts over the following 4 months. Both failed before they reached the palace. Vethron reviewed the outcome reports but was not entirely certain, looking at the available evidence, how the failures had occurred. The reports were sparse. The evidence was consistent with several different interpretations. She did not ask Daven for clarification. She had stopped needing the complete picture to function. The Queen's political situation stabilized over the following year. The contracting organization was eventually identified through a separate compact intelligence operation that Vethron suspected had received some very specific initial data from a procurement stream analysis she had seen Daven working on in month 4, and was dismantled through legal and financial mechanisms that produced no further attempts on the Queen's life. Daven's contract ended when the Threat Assessment Division downgraded the risk profile to standard levels. He left on a Tuesday morning after his 2-hour session. The cut above his eye was, as usual, almost healed. Vethron found him at the outer perimeter before he reached the transport. Where do you go next? She said. He considered the question. I have a file, he said. A risk profile I've been building. Different situation. Different political context. He paused. Someone's going to need this category of work in about 2 years. She looked at him. You already know who it is, she said. I have a strong hypothesis, he said. And you'll position yourself. I'll put the file in the right system, he said. And wait. She thought about 3 years. About 4 years of morning sessions before that. About the specific quality of a human being who had looked at a political risk that didn't exist yet and had started preparing for it long before the person at risk knew they needed help. The category Methkareth identified, she said. The psychological relationship with uncertainty. With not knowing. With moving before the picture is complete. Yes, he said. Does it have a name? He was quiet for a moment. She thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, in the old training documentation, the program the Compact stopped teaching 40 years ago, they called it the patience that acts, which is a contradiction in terms, technically. Patience usually means waiting. This is something different. Waiting while moving, she said. Preparing while not knowing, he said. Living in the gap between the threat that exists and the threat that's coming, and finding it habitable. He looked at her. Most species find it unbearable, he said. The not knowing, the incompleteness, the absence of a finished picture. They rush to fill it, and the things that move in the dark rely on that rush. He paused. Humans aren't designed for certainty. We evolved in environments where certainty was a luxury you died waiting for. We got very good at functioning without it. He picked up his bag. 2 years, he said. Someone else will need this. I'll be in position. He walked through the outer perimeter and didn't look back. Vethron stood at the perimeter and watched him go and thought about the cut above the eye and the maintenance manuals and the 4 days of knowing and the 90 seconds in the corridor and 3 years of preparation for a threat that hadn't materialized yet and 4 years of sessions before that and the specific quality of a being who had looked at a galaxy that was frequently and specifically dangerous and had decided, somewhere along the way, that the right response to that danger was not to wait for it. The right response was to already be there. She thought about a file sitting in a system somewhere, attached to a name that didn't yet know it needed him. She thought about a human who was, right now, already preparing. Somewhere in the galaxy, in the gap between a threat that existed and a threat that was coming, in the space beneath the standard framework where the things that defeated standard frameworks like to move, he was already there. Waiting in the way that acts. Patient in the way that never stops. And whatever was coming, wherever it was coming from, whenever it arrived believing it had prepared for everything